Hello everyone. Now, for those that aren't aware, the upcoming ranked season will start at the end of this week. It was just recently announced and it's going to be tier 8. So, as usual, of course, I will show you what ships I recommend and what ships I don't recommend. I do have to add the caveat here that this is, of course, only my opinion. This is what I think, what I feel based on my own experiences playing. Well, I played the game a significant amount, so but ultimately it's just my opinion on what ships I think will perform well. I've split the ships up into 3 different tiers, which is the top tier, the average tier, and ships that I straight up don't recommend for ranked. Beginning with the top tier and beginning with the ship that I think will be the absolute top performer this season, that is the Kid. The Kid has a combination of excellent concealment, Benson firepower, Fletcher hull with with amazing anti-air as well, self-sustain with heal, the highest health pool I think after the Uzuki. Excellent maneuverability, excellent speed. I think 39.9 is that with a flag. I think it's with a flag. It's fast, agile, great knife fighter. Can pick fights with any DD, come out victorious. You can get unlucky, you can eat AP pens, you can eat torps. Thanks to the heal, you can sustain it and you can return back to the fight, something no other DD, not even kind of the Akizuki can. I mean, the Akizuki can't really sustain the same way. It has a lot of health pool, but ultimately with the heal, the Kid actually surpasses it in effective health. US smokes, the amazing anti-air. You can not just do you deny scouting of yourself, you can also deny scouting of your teammates, you can stop strikes. Ultimately, the Kid has everything except torpedo power. It only has one torpedo launcher, but ultimately that is such a small trade-off for all the other strengths that this ship has. So for solo rank play, I think Kid is going to be the absolute star of this season. Follow up though, Benson. Benson has always been good, always been a great competitive pick. It will still continue being great. It has more torpedo power than the Kid, but it doesn't quite have all the other advantages. But I think it's still going to be an excellent DD. I mean, it handles great, it's got great concealment, it's a great knife fighter. There's a reason Benson has always been a staple pick for all competitive events that have been going on in this game, pretty much ever since the ship was released. Finally, when it comes to DDs, actually, we have the Luoyang. Where did I put my Luoyang? A Benson that with the Sea Hull, but without defensive AA, instead running Hydro. The difference is though that this Hydro is significantly better than the Z23 Hydro. They buffed the Hydro and I personally think they overbuffed it, because right now the Luoyang Hydro is 5.43 ship acquisition compared to Z23's pretty pitiful 4.44. So this means the Luoyang, when it comes to contesting and controlling capture points, the Luoyang is going to be so incredibly powerful. Thanks to the Hydra as well, there's pretty much zero risk of eating any torpedoes unless you really mess up. Overall though, it's pretty much a Sea Hull Benson and it's just very strong, and for this reason these three DDs are going to be my top tier picks for this season. Now, cruiser wise, I do have to add another caveat here. Cruisers in ranked will always be, playing a cruiser in ranked will always be significantly more challenging to have as big of an impact with as playing DDs and BBs. Pretty much every season you see the same thing when you get to the higher tiers, and that's tons of battleships, tons of DDs, and almost no cruisers. And that's because playing cruiser and being effective is a lot more difficult than playing either of the two other classes. The cruiser isn't really that easy to perform well in ranked, and I have to add that slight notice there before I start listing the cruisers that I think are strong. Strongest for this season, I'm probably going to pick with the Chapayev. I think the Chapayev is going to perform extremely well. In the past, the Kutuzov kind of overshadowed it very heavily, but ever since the smoke nerf, it's no longer that big of a difference, and I think right now the Chapayev is going to be quite a monster, especially of course with carriers. I mean, you can get 10.2 km conceal with Concealment Expert. Considering you can get an 11.7 km radar, that means if you get spotted in this thing and you pop radar, whoever is stuck in the radar is not going to be outrunning it. They're going to be permanently radared in return. Also, your smoke firing penalty is actually only 6.7, and this is pretty big because the Kutuzov smoke firing penalty is 7.7. So the Chapayev gets away with smoke firing a lot easier, and any DD trying to push up and spot it, well, they risk running into that radar, so it's significantly riskier. It also has great firepower, 4x3 if you put IFHE on. That is of course insane firepower, great firing range. The AA is good. It's overall, it's an excellent support cruiser, and if you got DDs around who are smart enough to keep it smoked, it can probably win the game for you. So hugely impactful. The downside is of course it's squishy. It's made of paper, it has no heel, and it can get exploded quite easily. But if you can play around those factors, very, very strong. Other top tier cruiser pick will be the Charles Martel. Now, the reason why I picked this one, well, first of all, this ship has kind of proven itself already. For those that follow the competitive scene, before the clan wars began, or clan battles began, people were all the competitive was still in tier 8, and the Charles Martel earned a spot among the top cruiser picks for good reason. It's got some of the best range, 17.6. If you pop defensive demolition expert and fire chance, you can reach I think 18% fire chance on the guns, 10-second reload on the guns with that range, good turret arrangement, quite fast with speed boost active. Without it, it does struggle though, that needs to be mentioned. The concealment is very, very good, 10.5 with concealment expert, and the health pool is pretty good. It's an overall long-range sustain support cruiser, and the reason why I think it will be quite strong this season is because this season there won't be battleships that will just be able to sit in smokes and fire and not get return fire in return, because the smoke concealment nerf. So anytime a battleship fires, he will be in the open, and the Charles Martel will be able to punish it. So I think there's a lot of opportunities for this heavy long-range DPM cruiser that can support from the backline with pure DPM. I think there's a lot of chances for this cruiser to really show its worth this season. So this will be a tentative top tier pick. It might be that it's still a cruiser, so it might be that it will ultimately fit better in the average than the top tier pick, but that remains to be seen how the season plays out. My final cruiser for top tier is the New Orleans. The New Orleans has gotten buffed significantly since past seasons. Worth noting is also, which is pretty damn strange, is that the New Orleans only has a detection penalty from firing in smoke of 7 kilometers. Once again, better than the Kutuzov. This kind of puts the Kutuzov 7.7 detectability into perspective, because this ship has 203 millimeter guns, and it still has a better concealment in smokes. The reason why the New Orleans is picked for this is of course the incredibly great concealment, a 9.1 km detectability, and a radar that is 9 kilometers of range, which means if you get spotted in the New Orleans, you can instantly counter radar, and you have a 30-second radar. So if you're pushing a cap, you get spotted, you're gonna radar that DD, and by the time the radar has turned around and started fleeing, you're already so close within range that he won't be able to flee the radar. So he's going to have to suffer a full 30-second radar before he can get out. And that can be a lot of damage. And the strength of this radar and the concealment is the reason why this is also a bit of a tentative top tier pick. The downsides, you do have great air concealment, but unlike the Chapayev, your long-range AA isn't really as strong. So even with the AFT, you will struggle to punish carriers for spotting you the same way the Chapayev will be able to. But ultimately, this ship, I think, has a lot of potential as well. It has great potential to become a huge carry ship for the team. Kind of depends heavily, though, on the team comp. If there's a carrier, I think it will be better placed in the average tier. It depends on how popular carriers will be this season. Ultimately, that remains to be seen. But the New Orleans is another ship that I think has a ton of potential this season if played well. Battleship-wise, there's two battleships that have consistently ranked among the top tier 8 picks in competitive. NC, what's there to say? Excellent concealment, 11.8. It's fast. It's got god tier, anti-air. The guns have incredible pen, and they are notoriously accurate. the shell velocity is the downside, but that just means that it's a hard ship to play. But people who play the NC well, they're monsters. This has been always around in competitive for that reason. The NC is an absolute monster. It's self-sustain against AA. You don't need to cover it at all. Any carrier trying to strike it is just going to get melted. And the incredible accuracy means that it can shred DDs, cruisers, battleships, anything. The NC has always been a monster. The Magi, also a monster of a battleship, more of a roaming role than the stationary nose-in role that you kind of tend to play in the NC, but the roaming Amagi is also incredibly scary. I mean, incredible torpedo belt, great health, great tankiness. Turtleback at close ranges means that you can brawl anything in it and you can't get citadeled. Great concealment as well, very fast. It's just these two battleships have proven themselves to be the absolute top tier picks, and this is what the top clans always played. For good reason. In the right hands, these two ships are complete monsters. Carrier wise, it's going to be Shukaku, and where the hell is my Shukaku? Okay, I'm absolutely blind, my apologies, there we go. Shukaku, oh wow, actually running the skin. The Shukaku is going to be probably the #1 top tier pick still for competitive, and that's because of the great setup it has. Double torpedo bombers means you can cross drop DDs. The ability to strike and take out DDs is so incredibly valuable. You can also cross drop cruisers, agile cruisers that could dodge a single drop. The strike power and the combination of air power is what will make the Shukaku still one of the absolute top tier picks. And of course, I mean, the pure scouting you can bring as a Shukaku is so incredible. You can just dedicate you can put an empty bomber above a DD, and you pretty much neutralize him from the game until the enemy carrier actually reacts or the enemy DD runs away. So the power of the Shukaku cannot be denied. Another carrier that I do expect to make it to the top tier though is the Enterprise. Once again, it has similar type of strike power, a bit of a different torpedo spread though, which makes it less effective at striking DDs. However, the hangar this ship has is so absurd. 96 hangar capacity, of which the vast majority is actually fighter planes. And the strength, of course, is that you can just the Enterprise can trade unevenly. You can lose planes in trades, and you can still deplane the other carrier because you have so many fighters to throw away. And because of this, you can get air superiority, and once the enemy has no more fighters, he can no longer really have any influence on the map, and that's when you get free farm position as an Enterprise. So these two carriers will absolutely get the top spots. Let's move on to the next tier, the average tier. First of all, Akizuki. Those who watch my channel know that I actually really love the Akizuki, but while this ship is an amazing randoms clubbing boat, the reason I can't put it into the top tier is simply the concealment. 5.9 isn't bad concealment, but the problem is it's so extremely clumsy. So when you spot other DDs and both teams start firing at each other, the Akizuki always tends to come out as the loser because it's slow, it's clumsy, it struggles. However, with other DDs, which there almost certainly will be in ranked, if you support your friendly DDs, the sheer firepower that this ship brings, running IFHE and these guns, you have the absolute highest firepower of any tier 8 DD by a mile. So the sheer firepower that it brings will be extremely strong. However, opportunities to farm other ships from smoke, like you can do in randoms, you just sit there and ducka some random battleship sailing past, unlikely to happen as frequently in ranked. So the Akizuki is a great pick, very close to verging on to a top tier pick, but ultimately I think the size and the amount of damage it eats, as well as the clumsiness, will deny it that top spot. Another point in its favor is also the AA, by the way. The AA will be quite good, especially if there's carriers, but no defensive AA means that it is vulnerable to strikes because of the awful turning circle. Another pick that is average is the Z23, and the same way the Akizuki is kind of pushed out of top tier by the Kid, the Z23 is pushed out of the top tier by the Luo Yang. The Z23 just has worse concealment, worse hydro. It's still a decent DD, I don't think I can put it into not recommended, because a well-played Cent 23 can still have a good impact, because the health pool is so massive on the ship. You get such a huge health pool on it. And of course, having Hydra on a DD will always be strong. The torps are quite good as well. 66 knot torps at 9.5 km range. The damage isn't that special at 14.4, but the torps are still very, very strong. So the Cent 23, certainly not top tier, simply because the Loyang exists. But I think it's an average DD. It will perform pretty okay. For the same reason, though, that this guy isn't in the top tier is the same reason why the CN Young. I actually don't even have the CN Young. That's how impressed I was with the CN Young. The CN Young is, of course, the new Pan-Asian DD, which is almost a direct copy of the Benson. The only difference is you cannot hit DDs with your torps, and considering how many DDs there are in ranked and how big of a deal it is torping those smokes and punishing DDs, not being able to torp them at all is, in my opinion, enough to push you down from top tier to average tier, because it doesn't really bring much else above the Benson. You can't slot defensive AA either, but I mean, it is a bit faster. Ultimately, the trade-offs aren't worth it, and the CN Young will just be an average ship in my book. Other DDs that will be average is the Kagero. Great concealment. The absolute strength of this, both the Kagero and the Harakaze. The Harakaze will also go into average. The strength of both of them is the great concealment. Now, the problem is torpedo reload, which is super fun in randoms, is completely unviable in ranked. You run into one carrier and your game is over. You're going to be completely useless. So you have to have smoke. You need, because ranked is all about consistency, and cheesy stuff like torpedo reload is fun, but it doesn't have any consistency for ranked, so I cannot recommend it at all. Harakaze, once again, great concealment. If you run the B hull with IFHE, you have the second best DPM of all the tier 8 DDs, which is quite impressive, but it's slow. It has a low HP pool. I think the Harakaze has 13.3k health compared to even Kagero's 15.1. So ultimately, once again, it doesn't really compete with the big boys. It's a average DD. I don't think it's a downside having it on your team. It's an average DD, but it's not going to be a top tier DD in my book at all. Finally, the Kiev. I was very hesitant where I would place the Kiev. Should I put it as a average or should I put it as a not recommended? I was quite close to putting it as a not recommended, because generally Russian DDs or pure gunboat DDs without concealment tend to struggle in ranked, because people who know how to aim, well, sometimes, I mean, getting high in ranked these days doesn't really mean you're good, it just means that you can grind it a lot. But ultimately, the vulnerabilities of this ship is focus, and if a carrier knows to drop you as well, that can also be quite the struggle. However, the Kiev is very, very fast, and it has such good firepower. It's got great health pool as well. As a support DD, to support your friendly, like your friendly DDs go in as scout and you push in behind it and support it, much like a Kaba would at high tier, I still think it will fit into the average tier. The problem will be when people think that they're capping DDs and they try to go and capture and contest objectives. And of course, the problem will be if your team doesn't have enough DDs and you end up getting a Kiev on your team. The Kiev alone will be almost useless. The Kiev relies on friendly DDs to give it a purpose. Friendly DDs need to scout enemy DDs so that the Kiev can actually have an impact on the game. So ultimately, thanks to all the strengths this ship has, I will put it as an average, even though the actual role it fulfills kind of puts it into the not recommended section. So average in my book. Cruiser wise, average cruisers, Atago. The reason why I put Charles Martel into top and Atago into average is multiple. First of all, yes, the Atago has better concealment, significantly better. With concealment, all the full concealment build, you reach 9.1, which is significantly better than Charles Martel 10.5. The problem is the range is only 15.8, but more importantly, your main battery reload is 16 seconds. This has always been the major downside of the Atago. You lack raw DPM. 16-second reload. In comparison, just to show you, the Charles Martel has a 10-second reload on 9 guns. Atago gains 1 more gun, which significantly worse turret angles, and it pays for it with 6-second reload. Yes, the fire chance is a bit better, but ultimately it's not good enough to justify this huge downgrade in reload and in DPM. The Atago does, however, have heal, which is very important because it gives it more sustain than almost any other cruiser in the game, perhaps part of Edinburgh at this tier. So the ability to sustain and the great concealment means that Atago will still be a good cruiser. Atago has always been good. It's never been a bad cruiser, and it will still continue to be a very good cruiser. And in the right hands especially, people who have been playing Atago for a long time who know what they're doing, this will be a strong pick this season. But I don't think I can put it into top tier simply because the biggest downside it still has will be this pure DPM. It's got good burst though, and that's kind of what you want to use on it. You use the concealment, you push close to capture points, you wait until the enemy DD is spotted, and then you open up with this huge heavy hitting HE, 3.3k HE alpha per shell, and you just punish them for it, and then you angle away as the battleships open up and so forth. So it will still be a good pick, but I don't think it will be a top tier pick. Edinburgh is another one that I'm putting. Do I even have it? I don't know if I own it. Let me see if I can pick it. This is going to be an average pick this season. Not recommended, not a top tier pick either. The reason, of course, sustain, smoke plus heal means it's very, very self-reliant. It's got a good concealment while firing in smoke at 5.5. Having an Edinburgh support cap will be very, very valuable. Of course, your value will heavily depend on the frequency of radar cruisers on the enemy team, and you'll have to play around that. And because, of course, of the vulnerability to radars and people who know how to fire into smokes, I can't put it into top tier, but I think a well-played Edinburgh will still be a good asset to the team. And finally, Kutuzov. Now, there's a ship that I never thought I would downgrade from top tier to average tier. I mean, let's look at the strength of this ship. Excellent anti-air, great firepower with great range. It's a pure DPM machine. Downsides, of course, very squishy, quite easy to citadel, but most importantly, this nerf hits it so hard. The smoke firing penalty hits it extremely hard, 7.7 km penalty. Now, in randoms, this penalty isn't nearly as big. In random battles, 7.7 detectability isn't that big because you just park a bit further from the cap, and you just sit there and you farm all these spotted battleships you just farm them all day and you laugh and you get 200k damage anyway. The problem is in ranked, it's not going to be that easy because, first of all, as I mentioned, rankeds always devolve into a shit ton of DDs. That's what they always devolve into. And if there's something the Kutuzov really struggles against since this debuff, since this nerf, it's DDs. Because if they get close enough to spot you, well then you're a sitting duck. Which means you have to take a much safer position in ranked, which in return means that you won't be able to have that same type of influence, same type of impact. So, will it be a strong cruiser this ranked? Absolutely. Will it be a good cruiser this ranked? Absolutely. You'll still have great AA effect, you'll still have great firepower, you'll still be able to support your team with the smokes, unlike very few cruisers can. So it will still be a good pick. But I don't think it'll be a top tier pick because this detectability nerf is a pretty goddamn big deal for the Kutuzov. And finally, we have the average battleships. Well, it's going to be both the Bismarck and the Tirpitz in this session. The reason, of course, these are tanky. One has Hydra, the other has Torps. Hydra is more of a defensive tool. Well, you can use it to push in, of course, but it's more of the fact that you can get away with certain types of positions that you couldn't without Hydro, and it gives you this safety net of spotting incoming Torps. Trying to spot ships when pushing in with 4.4 km Hydro is pretty sketchy though, and if a DD is dumb enough to get spotted by that, he would probably have died anyway. So questionable value on the actual aggression, but as a defensive tool, Hydro is great. The Tirpitz, on the other hand, torpedoes, great tool to threaten other battleships with. They know they can't get into a brawl with you because if they do, you will just blap them. But then again, trying to push in ranked is very, very hard. Usually the games are quite passive, they're quite slow, because both teams know that if you push in, you get wrecked by DDs or you just get focus fired and killed. So neither Tirpitz nor Bismarck are bad battleships, but they won't really get their full value out of ranked. it's going to be very hard to get the full value out. The same way that NC, the reason why NC and Amagi are so good in ranked is because it's quite easy to get the full potential out of them. Some of both the strengths these ships, both the NC and Amagi have, is great firepower, and it's quite easy to bring that great strength to bear. Whereas great brawling power, like the Bismarck and Tirpitz bring, it's very hard to bring that to bear. It's very situational, and because of this, they will only ever be average, not ever touching upon top tier. Alabama, this is also into the average. Now, it gets pretty close to the top tier, but the reason the NC exists, and because the NC exists, the Alabama will never be top tier. The NC is more accurate, has better AA. The Alabama in return has, of course, the incredible torpedo belt, which is one of its strengths, but the slightly worse accuracy is a pretty big downgrade, because ultimately torpedo belt is useful when you get hit by torpedoes. When you don't, it's completely useless, whereas the better accuracy is always useful on the North Carolina. So the Alabama is a solid pick. It's certainly not a bad battleship, but I would not... It can't get into the top tier because the NC exists. That's how simple it is. Finally, Lexington. Now, do I actually own the Lexington? I am blind. I don't think I own the Lexington. Now, the Lexington in past seasons has been not recommended, but this season it gets upgraded to average. And that's simply because the setup has been changed so that you no longer have to fully commit to firepower or fully commit to air control, neither of which are that good. The balanced setup of 1-1-2 doesn't really compete with Shukaku's or Enterprise's setups, but so that's why, of course, it won't be top tier like those two are, but it still has pretty damn big AP threat. It doesn't have the air control, but the AP and the general strike threat it has is that if Lexington manages to get through with a strike, it can absolutely cripple a battleship in seconds. So the threat of the strike will give it more impact than in the past, because it also has that one fighter to lock up enemy fighters to strafe. It has some air control, so that's why it will be into the average. But ultimately, Shukaku and Enterprise are still better carriers, by far, in fact. And then we have the not recommended. Well, let's see. Let's start with, do I even own the Ognavoy? Yes, I do. The Ognavoy is kind of a weird... It's a hybrid DD, like the Benson. The problem is, it doesn't really have enough firepower to actually knife fight other DDs. It doesn't really have enough torpedo power. Well, I mean, the torpedoes are pretty okay on it. Torpedoes are pretty okay. The problem comes down to the concealment being 6.1. So, it doesn't have the concealment, and it doesn't really have the firepower, so it's kind of a torpedo boat without the concealment. It sits in a really awkward spot, and it's just not recommended. It's simply not a good DD. I think it needs more gunpowder, or it needs more concealment to actually be viable, because a lot of people play it like they think it's a gunboat, but it's really not. With 5-second reload on these guns, it just gets eaten alive by other DDs. I mean, what's Benson gun reload on 5 guns is 3.3. On 4 guns, the Ognavoy has 5 seconds. In a straight up fight against any other DD that's even remotely focused on gunboating, the Ognavoy just gets eaten alive. It's pretty fast, it's got pretty good health, but ultimately it's definitively in the not recommended section. The Ognavoy just struggles. Other 2 ships that struggle is, of course, the Hipper and the Prince Eugen. They don't really bring anything to the table. They bring German Hydro to the table. That's pretty much it. And if you're dumb enough to actually get within 6 kilometers, then they do have some good torpedo power. But anyone who knows what they're doing will never allow that to happen. And those are situational strengths. And as I mentioned multiple times, situational strengths will never be as good as consistent strengths. And the consistent weakness of the Hipper and Eugen is the main battery guns. They have 4 x2, aka only 8 guns, with a 13-second reload. And that DPM is pitiful. The damage you pump out in this thing is so very sad. It's just not worth it. You also don't really have the concealment. You have some of the worst firing from smokes, so you can't really make use of the smokes the same way your team can. It's just no. Eugen, Hipper, no. It's 2 ships that I'm wanting to get buffed for some time. I personally think the main battery reload could easily be buffed to 11, maybe 10 seconds. Like, you could put it to 10 and see how it goes. The ship might still not be strong enough even if you do that. So that's a big downside. And battleships that are not recommended. First we have the key. The guns are unreliable. It looks awesome, but the guns are unreliable, and it eats tons and tons of pens. It eats so much damage. The armor is just too weak, and when the armor gets penetrated, you tend to eat citadels because the citadel deck gets overmatched. So if you manage to just pen the side armor, you will almost get a guaranteed citadel, because this deck gets overmatched by every caliber of battleship AP. So it's doesn't really deal consistent damage because of the guns, and it eats massive damage. Those are two consistent weaknesses. It has situational strengths, which include great anti-air, but once again that relies on there being a carrier, the carrier actually coming into your AA and so forth. These are situational strengths, and as I said, situational strengths are never as good as actual strengths. So the key is certainly in the not recommended. Another ship that is in the not recommended is the Monarch. Now, this one, once again, kind of split between putting this into the average and the not recommended. In fact, having a Monarch on your team doesn't necessarily mean that it's going to be a bad thing. It's going to be a loss, because the Monarch actually has the best concealment of all tier 8 battleships. You can get a 10.9 km conceal on this ship, which is amazingly good. But the problems start racking up. The guns, 381 millimeter guns. The reload is really nice at 25 seconds, which is good. The problem is it doesn't get the Royal Navy HE. Like the King George, for example, has 41% fire chance. This one only gets 35%. The HE does hit pretty hard, so questionable. The problem is if you try, you want to play it with the conceal and try to ambush people with the AP. The AP is just notoriously inconsistent. The Royal Navy AP at this caliber it struggles. Your dispersion struggles. So best bet maybe load HE, try to punish the DDs and support your friendly DDs with the great concealment. But then again, you have the worst torpedo belt of all. I think it's of all tier 8 battleships. You have the worst torpedo belt as well. Also, your back turret firing angles are awful. The back turret gets blocked by this thing right in front of it. So you actually have to give almost full broadside, well, a ton of broadside to be able to use the back gun. So when you play this thing, it's kind of like you're playing a really shitty North Carolina. That's what it comes down to. And the reason why it does have its strengths, the unique strength of the great concealment, but ultimately, also of course remember that Royal Navy only gets the super heal at tier 9. At tier 8 it still has the same heal that all the other battleships have. So ultimately, the question I would ask if you want to play the Monarch is, why play the Monarch when the North Carolina exists? And that's really what it comes down to. I guess it's easier to hit the shells because they're faster, but honestly the dispersion is so bad that even if your aim is on top, rather learn to play the North Carolina and become a monster rather than kind of waddle along with the Monarch. It's just not recommended in my book. It's very close to being an average ship thanks to the great concealment, but ultimately I've never really seen this ship as a big threat, and I don't think that's going to change anytime soon because the AP does so very little, and well, the HE, well, it's still an HE firing battleship, which is great for farming damage in randoms, great for being annoying, but when it comes to actually winning games, it doesn't really do that much, which is what it ultimately comes down to. You want to win games. Anyway, I think that was all the tier 8s. The Roma hasn't come out yet. The VIP, pretend there's a big VIP on top left corner. It hasn't come out yet. If it came out, I would probably put it in average/top tier. The reason for this is it has excellent armor. It has, well, the guns are pretty damn inconsistent, but ultimately the armor and of course the insane concealment means that this thing is so monstrously tanky that you can kind of push in and you can sit in positions that many others would struggle in, and ultimately it's just a very solid battleship. Ranked though, concealment isn't as strong as it's in randoms because of all the DD spam everywhere. So for ranked, I would put it somewhere between recommended or top tier and average. It's a very good ship though. It's a very good ship. The thing is, the things that make it so good in randoms are not things that make it as good in ranked, and that's something people have to keep in mind. Anyway, that was my ship list for this ranked season, and oh my god, it's been more than half an hour. Right, I'm gonna call it here. I hope you guys enjoyed it. Oh, and my tanking competition, my tanking for Christmas competition ends today, so I'll probably announce the winners and stuff on my stream today. And well, if you missed it, you can join my Discord. My Discord has like 4,400 members or something. It's grown to be like amazingly huge, my Discord, which is of course awesome because there's a lot of people looking for clans, looking for teams, and like it's become a whole community, which is pretty goddamn awesome. I'll give you a link to the Discord in the comment below. I hope you guys enjoy this tier list, and I'll talk to you guys later.